Oh, welcome. Today we are covering what conflict is and how to reframe it as a positive, understanding when it's worth it to engage in conflict and when you really need to walk away, and how to maintain your personal integrity and healthy boundaries in tough conflictual situations, knowing how to gauge emotional safety in the moment and how to end conversations that just really aren't productive, aren't going anywhere. So glad to welcome you again. If you would, when you think of the word conflict, I'm going to ask you to just type into the chat, what's one word that comes to mind when you think of conflicts that you've had, or just your own, how you feel about conflict. Danger, stress, upset, flooding, fight, tension. Oh my gosh. Yes. What else? Fear, tightness, inevitable, intense, confrontation, anxiety, intense, and hard. So we're going to work today to help you reframe it, because like anything, when you get skillful at something, it gets a little bit easier to be with that thing. So let me just read you a quote. This comes from Shakespeare. Sweet are the uses of adversity, which, like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. So there is a jewel at the heart of conflict, and hopefully when you leave today, you'll have a better sense of what that jewel is. So let's start with talking a little bit about what conflict actually is. So conflict is both a destructive force and a generative force, a creative force. It points directly at what is not working in relationship. Most of our conflicts take place under the surface, meaning what we're fighting about is rarely really what we're fighting about. And these are the true motivations for our conflicts are often hidden from ourselves, hidden from our conscious awareness. They are maybe our emotions, what's important to us, our interests, our longings, memories, things from the past, self-image, historical systems, our desires. Often our conflicts, which seem like they're really in the present, are arising from something that's unresolved in either our personal past or our relationship past. What conflict requires is at least two people. It requires a dispute or a disagreement where it's possible to take opposing sides. And the third thing is quite interesting, because it's the presence of negative emotions, right? If we just disagree with someone over what color is better, should we use indigo or violet, right? There's not a presence, well, maybe there is, but often there's not a presence of that negative emotion. So there's two people and there's a dispute, but there's not that third thing, which is the negative emotion. So to really know that conflict requires all three of those. And the presence of negative emotion often increases the presence of negative behaviors, right? So there's some other components of conflict which may or may not be present. So often there is an antagonistic spirit or intention, an intolerant goal. I'm not interested in resolving, right? I'm interested in fighting. I'm interested in staying in conflict. I'm attached to being in conflict. Sometimes there is a embittered life force. Sometimes there's close-heartedness. There can often be a system of adversarial competition. So when conflict happens, what's actually going on? So conflict is happening in our bodies, right? The symptoms of conflict happen in our bodies. So in our brain, our amygdala is firing. Our neocortex is often, which is the part of us that determines logical, kind, relational thought, is often offline, meaning we are triggered, right? When adrenaline is surging and our hearts are racing and our throat is tightening and our palms are sweating and our heart is pounding, like that is us being somatically triggered. And that is our bodies are really the indicator of, is this a dispute or are we in full-on conflict, right? The presence of those negative sensations and emotions. Something to know is that almost everyone behaves badly in conflict, and we often repeat the patterns from our family of origin, what we saw as kids of how to do conflict. And so few people do conflict really well. So we repeat what we've seen. And those patterns that we've learned they can frighten our partners, even though they feel acceptable to us. So maybe in our family, slamming doors was a perfectly acceptable way of expressing one's conflictual feelings, but it might frighten our partner because in their house where they grew up, that was not a thing, right? Conflict triggers our survival responses: fight, flight, freeze, appease. And you'll see it show up on the body level. Often there is blaming, hostility, accusations, right? These are things that happen during conflict. Bringing up the past, bringing up past conflicts unresolved. Something that's particularly detrimental is, and you'll hear me talk about this later, putting the relationship on the table, threatening breakup. Yeah. Calling the whole relationship history into question. Like, I don't even know if I like you. I don't even know if I love you. I don't even know if I want to be with you, right? We can ask those questions, but not when we're in conflict. That's not the time to make those decisions. Name calling, passive aggressive communication, things like eye rolling, or tightening of the lips, setting of the jaw, closing off the vulnerable bits. Sometimes in conflict, physically intimidating body language. Oh yeah, right? The raising of voices, the punctuation of faces and facial movements and body movements. Sometimes there's the throwing of objects, the interrupting of someone, degrading someone, withdrawing, refusing to engage in kind of creating that stony silence, that cold, stony silence, right? Really, when we're in conflict, there is a belief that there is a right way and that there's a wrong way. We are locked into black and white thinking. That's that adversarial condition, right? There's no creativity available. There's no creative problem solving. When we are triggered like this, it's just not going to happen. We're not going to come to a creative resolution. Yeah. So that's what happens when we're in conflict. And I know that most of you had, you put into the chat things that were pretty intense and unpleasant about what comes up for you when you think about conflict. But part of my job here today is to convince you of the benefits of conflict. So we're going to take a breath and we're going to think about that. So how is it that we could reframe conflict as beneficial? So one thing that can happen is when you change how you are listening to your opponent, when you move from a positionality of this is what I think to tell me what you think. When you soften, when you allow in more information from the person that you're conflicting with, right? And you allow yourself to be impacted by that information. Another benefit of conflict is asking questions that probe beneath the surface of everyone's assumptions. When we're in conflict, we are really often having a lot of assumptions. We assume what someone's intentions are based on the impact that we're experiencing. We assume we know the right way to do a thing, right? So when we are in generative conflict, we can learn to ask questions that are getting underneath those assumptions. Oh, I'm noticing that when you said this, I felt like this. What did you mean when you said that? What was your real intention there, right? We can be really creative in how we collaborate on repairing. There's so much to say here about creative collaborative repair. We can focus on the future rather than on the past. Okay, so that has happened, and now what? How do we want to move forward together? What do we want the next piece, the next moment of our relationship, the next week, the next year of our relationship to be like as a result of having engaged in this conflict. Conflict can allow us to speak the unspeakable, the truths that are in our hearts that we're afraid to say, that we're afraid to share, that heart truth that's usually so deeply guarded. The intensity and the emotions of conflict can allow that to be more freely spoken. And one really great constructive use of conflict is that it opens our eyes, our ears, our minds, our hearts, and it forces us to really pay attention to what's happening within us, within our partners, around us, between us. These conflicts become our teachers. They become our liberators because they really invite us to wake up, to become aware of what we are not yet fully aware of. We have not yet learned to handle skillfully. These conflicts, they can expose all of those inner wounds that need to come to the surface so that they can be healed. The emotional triggers, the false expectations that we have, anything that's misunderstood. Conflict can bring all that to the surface so that it can be engaged with. So when we think about a reframe of conflict, it's really, there's really a chance to get clear on our boundaries, on who we are and what we want, to redefine our autonomy in relationship, especially if we become too mushed together, and to deepen intimacy through knowing what's important to me and what's important to you, right? We get to see each other anew. We get to hold on to what's most important for ourselves, what's most important for this relationship container. And this is what generative conflict is. This is how conflict can be if both people in a relationship are willing to really reframe and practice, right? It just takes a lot of practice. And often when folks get into conflict, there's this like, oh no, God, here we are again. We've been through this 1,000 times. I hate being here. I don't want to be here with you. And creating a framework around generative conflict in your relationships, partnerships, friendships, family relationships, helping to understand that this kind of generative conflict actually is necessary to sustain the health of the relationship. Having that reframe is huge. It's a really big deal. And when Ari and I were first together, we worked really hard on this because, conflict can create a lot of negativity, a lot of harm, a lot of fear, right? Can feel really dangerous. It can be really dangerous. And so to create a framework in your relationships where conflict is something that happens, right? It doesn't have to be your favorite thing that happens, but that when it happens, it's useful and helpful. And we're going to talk more about how to do this. So that's the reframe. What's really important here is to decide, who do you want to be in conflict? So you got handed a bunch of stuff about how people are in conflict in your family. And if you think right now back to that, you can think about that. You can think about, oh yeah, this is what I learned. I learned that conflict was, we yell at each other, or we retreat into our own spaces, or just give it a sec, think about it, and think about, is that you've learned really in alignment with who you want to be? What's in your integrity and your dignity? Is that who you want to be now, as the self that you are now? And from there, from kind of that assessment, deciding, well, who do I want to be in conflict? How do I want to show up, regardless of how my partner's showing up, right? I do not want to make my actions dependent on, well, so they did that, so I'm going to act like this, right? Like, no, because it costs us too much. It costs us too much to step away from our own dignity like that. So we make agreements with ourselves about who we want to be, yeah? And we have lots of opportunities to practice. So we set our sights on new ways that we might want to be in conflict. And this idea of who do I want to be helps inform how we maintain our personal integrity during conflict, how we stay in touch with ourselves, how we stay in touch with our dignity, how we hold our boundaries, right? Because it imbues this sense of integrity regardless of how your partner is acting, right? And I mean, we can really see some of this in the presidential election right now that's happening, where one person's bad behavior kind of allows or encourages the other person to then behave also badly, right? But what is it to, if one person is behaving badly, to just say, well, I am going to stay in my dignity. I'm not going to be bullied. I'm not going, it doesn't mean I'm going to take shit, right? But I'm also going to practice being the person that I want to be, the more optimal self that I am moving towards, right? And that's, for me, one way of creating a lot of internal safety, of like, I'm with myself in this. So here, I'm going to just tell you what my list is of how I want to show up in conflict. I want to first and foremost retain connection with myself. I want to move slowly enough that I'm stopping and I'm feeling what's happening in my own body. Conflict can speed everything up, right? When our adrenaline and our heart rate, all that is just going really, really fast, and it's easy to leave ourselves. So first, I want to be able to retain connection with myself. It's important we make this list now when we're not triggered, right? We make it from our most centered selves. I want to respect my partner's humanity. I want to be someone who, when I'm in conflict with somebody, I'm not dismissive of their humanity. I don't name call. I don't belittle, right? That's just who I want to be. I want to move slowly enough that I don't say anything mean-spirited, that I don't say anything that's manipulative. And I can tell. I mean, I know I can tell when I'm like, it's just like that little edge of manipulation can creep in there, right? I want to express my deepest truth, my deepest hurt, my grief, and I want to own it as mine, not you made me feel like this. Like, I feel a lot of grief right now. I feel a lot of rage right now. I want to own what's true for me. And in the moment, I want to be as responsible as I possibly can. Now, this is sometimes possible for me and sometimes not, and probably for you too, right? So we make these agreements of who we want to be. And then sometimes in the moment, I can be like, wow, I really noticed that I am starting to raise my voice at you. And I'm starting to get a little heated, so I'm going to take a break. And that's being responsible. Sometimes, whatever, I'm moving too fast and I can't do that, right? However, even though I know that's not always possible to be completely adult and responsible in the moment in conflict, I can say that I will always honestly seek out and name my own contributions in a conflict. And I'll do that to my partner once I'm back at center. So, and I'll take a little bit of time and I'll be like, okay, I'll kind of leave the situation. I'm thinking, Ari did this, Ari did that, Ari did this, Ari did that, right? And then it's like, okay, stop with Ari already. What did Pavini do? Right? Okay. Come back to here. Come back to what's happening here. Right? And in finding those contributions, and sometimes they're hidden or they're sneaky, right? Finding those contributions and then naming them out loud to my partner. First of all, it's super vulnerable. And it also allows me to be shameless, right? Just be like, yeah, I did that. That happened. I lost my cool. I rolled. I'm sorry, right? Whatever the thing is, however I was contributing to the conflict. I'm not going to hide from my less than optimal motivations in conflict. I'm going to, if I was manipulative, if I was selfish, if I was childish, I'm going to say those things because I want to be good at conflict for me, not for anybody else, just for me. It's important to me. It matters. So that's a suggestion that I have for you, is to think about, who do you want to be from a really grounded place? Who do you want to be when you are in conflict? Make a list, write it down. When you are not in conflict, what's helpful is to practice embodiment, right? Because when we get into conflict, what happens often is our awareness leaves our body. We're just reactive. We're not able to feel how we want to move, how we want to be. We lose contact with our core, with our length, with our depth, with our width, with our center, with what's important. We lose contact with all that. So the more you can practice embodiment when you're not in conflict, the easier it will be to access that, all of that, when you are in conflict, right? And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it will be easier. So that the practices of feeling, every day in your body for where's my length and where's my width and where's my depth and where's my breath, right? Those kinds of embodied practices, whatever they are for you, will be supportive of being able to show up how you want when you're in conflict. So another thing that we talked about, that there have to be two, it takes two to tango, right? There's always at least two people in a conflict. And we also said that in conflict, when it's real conflict, we are triggered. So something that comes up a lot in my work with couples is the realization that when we're in conflict like this, both of us are triggered. It's a co-trigger. If one person gets triggered, the other person usually gets triggered, right? So if we are fighting, as opposed to just disagreeing more gently, we are both triggered. So know that. And when you are triggered and when you're off center, nothing helpful is going to come out of it. Like, you can't be in a space of generative conflict while you're triggered. Does that make sense? So it's both people's job to get back to center, right? And we all do that in different ways. We have our different strategies. One thing that has been really helpful in my life of conflict is to have it be okay, agreed upon ahead of time, to take a break, to say, whoa, I am really triggered right now. I can't engage with you skillfully. I'm going to take a break. And then the magic here is to say, I'll be back in 10 minutes. I'll be back in 15 minutes. I'll check in with you again in half an hour, right? So that piece is important, like the when I'll be back, because if we're in conflict with our person, and if they have anything around abandonment, and we're like, gotta go take care of me, like, it's just going to be harder for them, right? So to really put that into place, like, hey, I can't be with you in a good way right now. I need to go take care of me so I can be with you in a good way. It's important, it matters, and I'll be back. And so, like, let's say you take your break, you take your 15 minutes, and at the end of 15 minutes, you are still not centered, right? It's okay. You just come back and you say that. You just say, hey, I thought my 15 minutes would be okay. I know that it's hard for you to wait. I totally honor that. I just am not back yet, right? I'm gonna try again. I'll be right back. And you do that until it feels like you're centered enough. Like, you don't have to be perfectly grounded and like, I am now whatever in a bliss body, but you don't have to be like that. But you do have to be in touch with yourself. You have to be feeling yourself enough so that you can have a generative conversation. And those emotionally honest, raw conversations can really happen in that space of when there has been conflict and people are mostly back at center, more centered rather than less centered. Yeah. So understanding how your body responds during conflict is really helpful. We all have primary ways that we're more comfortable with, right? And in the combination with our partner or in our people who are in our lives, like, that can shift, right? So the three options here are: do you turn towards, do you turn away, or do you turn against, right? So turning towards is something like, you're leaning into the conflict. Tell me more about what's going on for you, because, like, this is how I'm feeling, right? Like, you want to stay engaged. Turning away is moving away is withdrawing, pulling back physically, pulling back emotionally, psychically, right? Taking space forever, thinking about breaking up. Turning against is when you get mean, when you start attacking, right? When your partner becomes your enemy. And so we have patterns based on what happened in our childhood, right? And also that combination with our partner. And so knowing like, oh yeah, this is what I typically do. There's no shame in any of these. These are just like what happens, right? Knowing what happens when your body is in conflict with another body just gives you more information about, okay, how do I have to work with my bad self, right? How do I have to take care, right? So, and it just really, I think, helps you see the patterns more in real time, and therefore you can start to name them at some point. Yeah. So let's take a breath there. And there'll be, I'm going to talk a little bit more, and then there'll be some time for Q&A as well. So stick around. Also, I have a cool free thing I'm going to send you. So stick around to hear more about that. So when is it worth it to engage in conflict, and when is it helpful to walk away, right? So we've been talking a lot about somatics and about bodies. When you are mostly centered and your partner is mostly centered, and when you can speak from the heart of your own experience, that's when it's helpful. And when the agreements that you've made, we're going to talk about that in a sec, when the agreements that you've made are being followed. In the heat of conflict, it can feel scary, can feel overwhelming, flooding, dangerous. So you have to get good at gauging your own safety. And here I mean unpacking what is actually dangerous from what is deeply uncomfortable. And so when you ask yourself, am I physically safe? So this is part of knowing when to engage and when to walk away. Am I physically safe? So if you are in conflict with someone who is making threatening movements towards you, is being degrading towards you, right? You're not actually physically safe. And so that's a moment to walk away from that conflict, right? However, if you are feeling really deeply uncomfortable and you're feeling unsafe, but not physically unsafe, if your partner is, or the person who you're fighting with is mostly being respectful, right, is angry, is pissed off, and is maybe being even big and loud with that anger, but not being mean or aggressive towards you, you're probably uncomfortable. And conflict is uncomfortable. There's just no way around it, right? So that's one question to ask yourself. Am I physically safe, or am I in physical danger? Am I emotionally safe? And by emotionally safe, I mean not that you feel safe, that your partner isn't calling you names, isn't saying insults to you, right? You don't have to tolerate that. That's not safe. Or am I just deeply uncomfortable because this sucks, right? Our brains can have a hard time telling those things apart, and it behooves you to get good at it, right? Am I acting safe? That's the second question. Am I being a safe relationship person right now? Am I upholding my my values around conflict? Am I being mean? Am I being aggressive? Am I taking shots below the belt? Right? If I'm doing any of those things, if I'm putting the relationship on the table, if I'm making threats, if I am talking shit about somebody's family, right? I'm not being a safe partner. I'm not being safe in conflict. And if I notice that I'm not being safe in conflict, I can also take myself out of that situation. I can just be like, whoa, I noticed I am not acting the way I want to act. I need to take myself out. I need to take a break. It's okay. You can do that. Trust is really the hardest thing, I think, during conflict. Trusting that that the other person it's safe enough to be angry and to be conflictual. And if both of the questions that you ask is, am I physically safe? Am I emotionally safe? Am I acting safe? Right? If that's all true, and I'm still feeling like all those feelings, like probably what's happening is I am feeling like my partner is other, right? We have become our beloved friend or our beloved person has become an antagonist in our lives for that moment, right? Breath here can be a really helpful tool. It can really help us remember, hey, this is just a moment of conflict. I remember that I love that person and that they love me and that we're just in conflict right now. That's what's happening, right? Let's talk a little bit about guidelines for fighting. So here we come to the skills part. You doing okay? Everybody doing okay there? Yeah. Just type okay if you're doing okay in the chat. Great. Fantastic. Good, good, good. Lots of okays. Good. So think about someone who you respect as a fighter. This could be a martial artist. It could be a boxer. It could be a wrestler. And maybe it's just kind of if you don't have any particular people, maybe it's a sport, right? Great professional fighters adhere to a code of conduct, or they face disqualification, right? You can't be a boxer and be kicking people in the balls. Like you're not going to be able to be a boxer if you do that, right? You have to learn to manage your fight response in a way that is responsible and respectful, and it's following the rules of engagement while you're beating the shit out of somebody, right? It's like any rules of engagement. I mean, I think that this is true for many different kinds of sports, right? But these rules of engagement are these shared values, right? It's how we're coming together to fight in a structured way. And so we have role models in our cultures for doing this, right? We have things that we can look to where fighting is already happening well. We just don't know how to do it yet in interpersonal relationships. So you got to figure out your shared values around conflict. So after you have been like, okay, this is my part, this is how I want to show up when I'm in conflict, you have to sit down with your people and figure out in advance, not when you're triggered, what are your rules for fair fighting? How are you going to fight in a way that is respectful of both of you? And there's no judgment here, right? Like, I remember my couples therapist saying to me and my partner, hey, y'all can totally Sid Vicious, Nancy Spungen, very violent fighters, you can totally Sid and Nancy it out if you both agree to it, if it's consensual, right? If that's how y'all want to fight, you can fight like that. So there's not like, I'm not saying that there's like, this is the right way to fight. I'm saying that there's a right way for you and your partner or your friend, right? What is acceptable to you both? What's your stance on name calling? Okay or not okay? Yelling, okay or not okay? And sometimes there's a difference between yelling at someone and yelling your feelings. Like, I'm frustrated right now is different than you're fucking frustrating me right now, right? Very different. So is yelling okay? Can people raise their voices? Some people, this is like super scary for. Some families, this is how we feel and emote and how we move the energy through us, right? How about insults? You know, what's your stance on that? What's your stance on things like eye rolling, right? What's your stance on being snarky or sarcastic? What about physically aggressive movement or postures? Swearing, making threats, violence. So I want to pause here because with violence, because like, I don't know that it's like, I don't necessarily have a judgment around this as long, again, as it's consensual. So there was a situation with my partner where we were really struggling in the midst of some polyamory stuff, and we were trying all these different fighting techniques. And there was one moment we were on a walk on top of a mountain, and I was just in the midst of really having a lot of feelings, and I was like, I just want to fight with you. And Ari like took his glasses and he ripped his glasses off. He's like, all right, let's wrestle, right? And we wrestled in the gravel on top of this mountain, and like both got like bloody and like hurt a little bit, but like it felt really good. And it was, but the thing was, it was consensual, right? There wasn't harm that was done. We both got hurt a little bit, but we didn't get harmed because it was consensual. It wasn't power over, it was power with. So just to say, think about it. Like, what do you, if you want to wrestle it out, go for it, right? Just make sure it's consensual. What about breaking things? What about interrupting? Talking smack about your partner's family or friends or other relationships. Blaming, taking time outs, talking about breaking up. Is that okay or not okay? Making passive aggressive statements. Here's one. Using collapse as a strategy. Fine, you're fine. It's cool. You win. I'm totally, you're right about everything. Like, oh, that one just makes me so mad, right? Like, don't collapse. What about leaving resentments festering after the conflict? What's your agreements about that? Or do you want to hash it out? So those are things that you and your partner can talk about ahead of time. Like, it's not like you're not going to get opportunities for practice, because you will, right? I want you to be careful with this one, because let's say you create this really beautiful agreement value statement about like, okay, how do we want to do conflict? And you're in the fight and somebody does something that is like, in your interpretation, a rule is broken, right? It would be very easy to pivot and to start fighting about that broken rule. Yeah. So my suggestion is that you don't do that. My suggestion is that if that is your experience, if you're like, hey, we agreed no swearing and you just swore, or I just swore, that you just name and you say, it's my experience that blank just happened. So it's my experience that swearing just happened. I'm going to walk away and let's connect again in 10 minutes and decide if we can figure this out together, or if we need to get some extra support. So it's my experience that blank just happened, and I'm going to walk away and let's connect again in so many number of minutes and see if we can figure it out or get some more support. Right? So it's this like kind of sidesteps that whole let's fight about the rules now thing, because what we're fighting about is rarely what we're fighting about. And with that particular strategy, you can name something that you did or that your partner did. Yeah, and the caveat here, just be careful, because it can be weaponized, right? Just like anything. And also that we keep fighting when there's two of us who are still in the fight. And when our systems are adrenalized like that, it can feel sometimes really good to fight it out. So holding all that. So skills, body awareness, feeling what's happening when you're facing conflict, right? The tendency is to kind of tighten, to lock down, to eyes get big, breath gets shallow, big muscles prepare to do something. You have to train this like a professional fighter, a martial artist, an emergency room doctor, a paramedic, a firefighter, who have situations that are flooding, overwhelming, triggering, activating to their nervous systems, and are still able to act with presence, with mindfulness, with skill, right? So we train it. One particularly fun skill building exercise is to fight in slow motion. This is actually often how Ari and I fight. I don't want to make messes that I have to clean up later. Like, I don't want to have to come back and apologize for being an asshole, so my pride just does not want me to do that. So I am a slow fighter. Like, instead of like things moving quickly, they slow way down. And so it takes forever for us to have a fight. But the slow motionness of it really allows for me to take breath, for me to pay attention to what's happening in my body before I formulate something that I'm going to say, and those words that are irrevocable come out of my mouth, right? Another skill for conflict is around resentment. So resentments that are left to fester, this is why I asked you to think about it in your agreements, are they just stick around and eat up your relationship, right? And so you have to be willing to say what you're resentful for. So as part of our cleanup process, we do something that that sounds like this. I resented you when you said this. When you turned your chin and didn't look at me when I was sharing what was important, I resented you, right? Or whatever the things are, but to like actually name them as resentments, being willing to say them and being willing to hear them, right? And not have to fix them, like whatever, it's just resentment. Like they just were mad that you did that, right? So in that case, my partner is just like, yeah, you resented me when I turned away. Fair, right? Deep listening to understand. So we talked about that spirit of unwillingness to resolve, right, is one of the pieces of like why conflict happens. And so the antidote to that is obviously a willingness to resolve, like a desire to resolve, right? And that requires everybody to get into a stance of deep listening where we're really trying to understand. Like, because usually in conflict, it's like we're fighting so hard to be understood that we're forgetting to try to understand. And so for this skill, we have to pivot and we have to extend our understanding and we have to really get in there and we have to ask a lot of curious questions. And if we think we understand, we can try the old NVC technique of reflective listening. This is what I heard you say. Am I getting it? What else am I missing? Really trying to understand where is the other person coming from, right? And the funny thing is like when we extend understanding, it comes back most of the time, right? Our partners want also to repair. Otherwise, if they don't want to repair with us, they probably don't want to be partners with us. We're going to talk about that in a sec. That thing about taking breaks to come back to yourself, right? And to let your partner know when you'll be back. There's that window of tolerance. I said that we have to be centered enough to be able to be in generative conflict, right? It doesn't mean that strong emotions can't be present, because they can, right? But it's like, I might be feeling big feelings, but I'm still available to process what the input is, right? Oh, wait, my partner just said something important. Yeah. To be clear on my own boundaries, not as walls, but as dignity. Like I will not allow myself to be yelled at if that's what's true for me. I will not allow myself to have insults slung at me. If that starts to happen, I will take myself out of the situation. One resource that I want to suggest to you is Carla McLaren talks about anger as boundaries, of like taking the emotion of anger and the experience of anger and channeling it into a boundary that holds you, which I find very useful and helpful, rather than like thinking about anger as something that can be targeted at someone. It's just like, whew, what if it's just a boundary, right? Like, this is what's important to me. Lastly, we're going to take some questions here in a minute. Equally, we're going to talk about repair, because equally important is how well you do conflict. Part of that is how well you do repair. And the conflict, when it's generative, includes really skillful, creative repair. And in December, I'm going to be teaching a whole webinar on how to do repair, how to do relationship resilience. So come to that. But I do want to say a few words here about repair. Because at the heart of every conflict, there is a path towards resolution, forgiveness, reconciliation. At the heart of every conflict, that path exists. If we hold conflict as a generative, spiritual path, there is always an opening to this. It's hard sometimes to find it, and that becomes our job, right? And repair is an inside job. You can hold on to your resentments as long as you want, right? And you can protect them and be very precious about your resentments. I know, because I can do it, right? A friend of mine posted on Facebook recently that she was writing about a slight that she had experienced 17 years earlier. And she was laughing at herself a little bit. But like, I can do that too. I think we all can, right? We get to hold on to our resentments. You have to truly want to reconcile, which means letting go of the whatever you're benefiting from staying hurt. And it doesn't mean the hurt didn't happen. It doesn't mean it goes back to the way it was and you're not hurt, that didn't ever happen to you. But if you want to reconcile with another person, if you want to truly repair, you have to be willing to, right? That's why I'm saying repair is an inside job. And if you find that at that time you don't want to reconcile, you're not willing to let go of the hurt yet, it's time to seek support and understand what's going on here. Is it, why do I want to hold on to this? How is this in service to me right now? What need am I meeting through holding on to this resentment and not wanting to reconcile? And I'm not saying that reconciling is always the answer, right? Because sometimes leaving the relationship is how we repair. Like, oh, I recognize that my contribution is that I've been holding on to this relationship. And it's time for me to leave. Oh, right? If your partner is showing up all the ways fully in the repair process and you still aren't willing to let go of your resentment, just name it to them, tell them, be honest, right? And if you're not ready to leave the relationship, really good thing, getting that support of navigating the resentment, because usually when that's happening, it's about your own unmet needs that are being projected onto your partner. And you might not just be willing or able to take responsibility yet. That's okay, just be honest about it. So yeah, because we can leave relationships without creating further harm. We can leave relationships and respect each other's humanity and dignity and our own as well. So that's what I want to say today about conflict. And I am going to open now to some Q&A in just a minute, but let me just tell you about a couple more things. Our next webinar for Wilcilium will be November 5th, and it's about needs in relationship. Hot topic, needs. And then, as I said, the December webinar will be about relationship repair, reconciliation, and resilience. And you can find out more about them on our website, wellcelium.org, WELLCELIUM.org. Also, we are having a new course launching soon, which is the Well Couple course, and it's for folks in a relationship. And this could be you and your partner, could be you and your best friend, could be you and your mom. It's a 13-week deep dive into really the skills that you need for thriving relationships. And I'm teaching it. It's our beta run of it, so it has a special price. And if you, I'll put the link into the chat, because you can go there and you can get onto the sign up list so that you are the first to hear when we open registration. So let me just stick this here for you. There you go. Cool. So go ahead and copy that so you have it. And I would love now, we have about 10 minutes, would love to hear your questions. So if you have a question on conflict, go ahead and put it into the Q&A. Okay, so there's a couple here already. So I'm going to, and I'll just answer them until we get through, until we run out of time. Problem I have sometimes in conflict is where I or the other person use the information to hurt themselves. When I share, for example, it's weaponized by the other person against themselves. I've also done this on the receiving end. Any tools for how we hear or what we do when the other person is weaponizing what we say against themselves. Yeah, so this is like, I say something like, I felt really hurt when you didn't call when you say you're going to, right? And what they do is they say, I am so terrible at following through on calling. I suck at this. Like, this is that thing that I was talking about of collapse, of when someone like, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm terrible, I'm bad. Ugh, it's so frustrating, right? Because it just, like, you're trying to share a thing and it's getting circumvented. The thing is getting taken over by their weaponizing of it. This is a total thing that happens. The language ahead of time is the best thing. So when you're not in conflict, you can talk about it, and give it some language of like, hey, I noticed that when we're in conflict, sometimes I say something and then you weaponize it against yourself. And then that becomes the thing that we're conflicting over, right? When you're taking so much responsibility that I feel like there's no space for me, right? Can we talk about that? Can we have some strategy about that? But like, first of all, having language so that when it happens, you can name it. I'm gonna equanimity, Tucson. I'm gonna skip your next question just to make sure that other people have some chances here. Raiden, how can you disengage from someone who doesn't want that to happen? For example, parents. Ooh, yeah. So, our boundaries are ours to uphold. So if I say, don't call me, it's my boundary, Raiden, don't call me, right? Like, I just have to not pick up when you call. That's my boundary. And so how to disengage is to, the adult way, I think, is to tell them, hey, I need to take a break from our connection for a little while. I need to do some work. And I understand that that might make you feel all kinds of ways. And what I'm going to do is I'll check in with you in 3 months or whatever it is, just like give them that, like, I will be back thing. And if you think that's true, if you just need a relationship break, if you need to disengage from someone who doesn't want that to happen, full stop, that's hard. It's hard, and you can do it, and I have done it. It's a relationship break, right? Yeah, like, done. We're not relating anymore. Esther says, can we hear more about slow fighting? Yeah, so slow fighting is, one way to practice it is to actually practice slow motion fighting. So this would be a physical practice where you and your partner are not in conflict. You're just practicing. You're standing and you're throwing a punch like this. And you're putting as much force as you can behind it. You're not pretending, and then they're at the same time you're punching, they're like, right? So that's one way to play with it. But then the other way is to, if you're actually in conflict, to hear, to breathe, to like incorporate just a lot more breath and time between when you're answering or when you're responding to what they're saying. Okay. The author of Anger is a Boundary is Carla with a K McLaren. What about relationships where you both naturally turn away and where it's difficult for either of you to engage in conflict? Yeah, this is conflict avoidance, right? And so talking about that pattern, and maybe here it's something like scheduling times to bring, so you maybe have a weekly meeting or a monthly meeting where you have an agreement, like, let's talk about what's hard, like, let's talk about what's hard in this relationship. And then you might avoid that date, but at least you have, you're having something. The other thing you might do is have a third person present who can help evoke what's true for you, right? If you want to have couples therapy, or just have a supportive friend present who can sit down with both of you and make it feel safer to be in conflict. Yeah. Okay. How do I respond when my partner is only working to poke holes in my arguments or feelings and not listening to understand? Yeah, this is a good question. So if your own boundaries with yourself are about, I want to extend understanding and I want to be understood, right? So when that behavior, this is like that, well, why did you do this? Why did you do that? What's up with this? And like, I see a discrepancy here, but you said this and you said this, right? That kind of like trying to trying to logic you out of what you're feeling. Okay, hold on. Let's take a little bit of a break. It feels like we're not totally understanding each other, and it's really important to me that we understand each other. And so would it be okay to just take a little break and come back in 10 minutes, right? Where we can really listen more deeply. And then I think asking specifically for that reflective listening practice. So great, I'd like to share what's important to me here. Are you willing to just listen and then tell me what you heard me say? it just slows things down, and it can get us out of that, like, well, what about this thing? Yeah, good. Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. How do you know when conflict is too much and you need to end the relationship? Yeah, this is hard because it's so, first of all, when we are choosing a partner, we're often we're going to trigger each other, right? And it's actually good because we want that stuff to come up so we can heal it. But if there's no respite, if there's no rest, if there's never any ease, if it's only work all the time, right? If the sweetness in the relationship is far outweighed by the conflict, I mean, you have to figure out what percentage is right for you. For me, like, I'm willing to be in conflict 10 to 15 to 20% of the time, knowing that sometimes, like, there's periods of more intense conflict, right? Like I talked about when we were in like some polyamory turmoil, that was a period of a lot of conflict, right? Like we were conflicting several times a week during that period. Usually we're conflicting a couple times a month. And you have to figure out what's right for you. But if it's mostly feeling bad and it's never feeling good, and it's been like that for a while and it doesn't seem like it's going to get better, if you get support and it doesn't change, I think it's time to end the relationship. So I also think it's time to end this webinar. So I'm sorry I didn't get to all of your questions, and I'm going to look at them in the chat, and if there's anything I can respond to, I'll send you an email and respond. I'm also going to send you the replay and the thing that I said about making relationship agreements. Around conflict, I'm going to send you that too. So you'll be getting that in the email. So look for that. And yeah, I am really grateful for your time today and your attention. And I know it's important. Your time is so important. So thanks for giving it to me. I'm Dr. Pavini Moray for Wellcilium. Talk to you soon.